and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in a clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. We have Alejandro Rojas coming up in just a minute with UFO Updates. And after that, we have Kevin Randle, Dr. Kevin Randle, coming on the show. I always enjoy speaking with him, a man of reason. I want to thank all the supporters that help us out here to support the show for $2 or more a month. And you get to hear the whole show, not just the first hour, for free. And to do that, the information's right on our website. We also have a 1 year, yearly payments, and it's a one-time sign-up, and you could just put the link in your media player and go from there. Oh, before I forget, I want to announce that I have reopened the forum. The sign-up trick question is, what is Stan's last name, a repeat guest on the show? Stan Friedman, of course. So it's an easy sign-up to join the forum. And on the forum, there will be questions posed for the guests. Already I have a couple of entries this week for Kevin Randle. So in the forum, I want to get that active again, and I hope you will join the forum. So that is it. Again, Kevin Randle's coming up, and right now we have the esteemed Alejandro Rojas. How are you?
Hello, I am good.
That was
my esteemed voice. Yeah,
I like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's cool you're having Kevin Randle on. He's great. What's great about Kevin Randle too is that he's a straight shooter. He's very grounded, and he's got great integrity. He's willing to stick to the truth and call it like it is, despite what effect that may have on relationships with others, which is a true researcher. So yep. I greatly respect him for that. He's a good guy.
Yes, and
just wanted to say that.
I'm glad you did also, because we're going to be talking also about his blog spot, because so many times I'm trying to figure something out and talk about the voice of reason. It's like, you'll find it on his blog, and, there's the answer right there. So anyway, I really always enjoy speaking to him, and he's been a repeat guest, and hopefully he'll be on many times. But what's going on for the UFO news this week?
What's going on? First, I'm going to plug something. Sure. Hopefully that's okay. Well, you really liked it, the last Open Minds UFO Magazine video that we did. Mm-hmm. And we did just post a new one on Friday that I think is even better. I mean, the first one's good. I think it covers the Washington, D.C. And 1952 event more thoroughly than perhaps you can see out there anywhere else. But this one goes beyond that to hard and fast just dispel this fallacy that the Air Force tries to push forward, which is that they have no longer investigated UFOs after 1969. It used to be very conspiratorial to say something like that, and people will know I'm not really necessarily a conspiracy guy, but, much like Kevin Randle, but we have government documents that not only show us what and when and how they've been investigating, but that just prove that, and these are files that are on the DIA site. We offer links where you can go see these things. These are files that are out there and show that they've been investigating, and what they've been investigating and how and why I think is terribly interesting. We get into that in this video, and we'll get into that more thoroughly in future videos. But I think people should really like this one. We've got a great response, and I think this one includes information that is not so readily available or known. So I think people will see stuff here that they haven't seen before. So I hope people like it. Yeah, it's exciting. I was so excited to get it out, and I would love for your listeners to go check it out. It's free, and it's on our YouTube.
It's on your YouTube, and it's you can access that through openminds.tv, as well as I will put that on my sidebar, and it'll show on all my web pages.
So, thanks, buddy.
Yeah, all you have to do is just click on it and click the I don't know what you call it, expand button, and it'll just take over your computer. That's how it works.
So I have 3 stories here I want to get through, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is just kind of interesting. This is a guy in New Zealand who had a sighting on September 1. He drew some pictures of it, and which is kind of funny, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But essentially, this was about 9 p.m. on September 1st, and he said he saw this big, bright, glowing ball. It was huge, and he ran and he grabbed his camcorder, and he filmed it, he says, for about 17 minutes. And he said there were 6 smaller craft, maybe even 7, and there was also a red orb beneath this craft, and that these crafts kind of attached to each other, and this whole thing was going on. So he watched it for a while, and he filmed it. He says he got like 5 or 6 really good minutes of video, and he tried to send that to his friends and family, but it didn't work. In fact, he said, some bastard had hacked it, and that's a direct quote. Yeah, and that's what he gets into is that, it's hacked and he couldn't share the video. So if a MUFON person wants to see the video, they're going to have to come to his house because it won't work when he tries to email it to people. Of course, some people have said, well, he's suspicious that somebody's keeping it from getting out, or of course that it was hacked. But it's just kind of a funny, interesting story there.
It's probably just too big of a file to go through email.
From a Kiwi kid. You're right. Did you know they call New Zealanders Kiwis?
No, I didn't know that. We have some listening to the show.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah, I have.
Yes.
And it's not a bad thing. They like it.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Because the way you said it was like, oh, you're offending my New Zealanders. No, they like it. It's cute.
Okay, so I will do a shout-out to the Kiwi kids out there.
Mm-hmm. So
that is what you call them, right?
Yeah, Kiwis, actually. I added the kid part myself because I think this person was a kid, so it was a Kiwi kid.
Uh-huh.
So a Hawaiian UFO story. This is a photograph that was taken in Hawaii on October 23rd, so just about a week ago or so. And they took some pictures, and in one of their pictures is kind of a golden dish-shaped object. So they thought that was weird, and they turned that in. And, typically, if this object was gray or a bird color, I would say it's a bird or a bug. But it is a weird color, and it still could be a bird or a bug. You could see, the person zoomed in to be able to see this object, this beautiful landscape in Hawaii. Funny thing is, it was by Kanoa Bay. I'm probably saying it wrong. But funny thing is, this story's been picked up. Our stories keep getting picked up by the British tabloids, and they don't credit us at all at Open Minds, unfortunately. I must say there's a site, Inquisitor, that picks them up also, but at least they credit us. And I don't mind people picking up our stories and writing about them. It was just nice to say, you got it from Open Minds. But, of course, the British tabloids being what they are, they have to add to it. So if you see some stories out there about Hawaiian UFO base, that's where that stems from, is this story. So they picked it up and they've jumped because, well, and you can't blame just them, although putting that in the headlines is kind of silly. This was also suggested by a UFO person that they spoke with. And unfortunately, they like to talk to people who come up with these wild theories every time they show them a picture, and then they go with that. But yeah, so they've gone so far as to say just because of this picture of a possible cloud or bug, maybe something more interesting, but off of this fuzzy picture, they have determined there is a UFO base.
It must be underground.
Yeah.
Hawaiian Dulce or something.
Yeah.
Wow.
A more interesting picture on the third story is actually of some lights, a light phenomena that is from Italy, and they believe them to be earthquake lights. But the picture is actually not what the story is about. The story is about a research group that is creating a peer-reviewed journal. So they like to use the term unidentified aerial phenomena. That is a term used, it's credited for being coined by essentially NARCAP, which is the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena. One of their founders, Ted Rowe, is actually working with some other researchers, and I know one of them is Erica Lukes, and they are putting together, they're going to try to start a peer-reviewed journal. So they're going to try to get some scientists together and create this journal because, you know, essentially if you're trying to investigate UFOs, there's no peer-reviewed journal where you can get, experts and scientists to look at it to figure out if this is truly an anomalous phenomena. So they are looking to do that. And so we kind of have an exclusive press release written by Ted Rowe himself. And we posted that on the website to show you what they're up to and how they're going to create this group. So it's really cool. So these Italian potential earthquake lights pictures is one of them that, the type of thing they want to look at. They also want to look at, things like the Hesdelin lights, the Marfa lights, places where people see these lights often, but we don't know what's going on with them. So that's pretty cool. And I should mention that Ted Rowe and Erica Lukes will both be speaking at the UFO Congress coming up here in February. So go to ufocongress.com to find out more about that, or openminds.tv to find out more about all of these stories and about the conference as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. I'm going to have to ask, Erica Lukes has been on a number of times, but I'm going to have to get a hold of this Ted Rowe. It sounds really interesting. Maybe I'll get him on the show coming up.
You should, yeah. He's a great researcher. I mean, NARCAP, I think, is credited as being one of the most serious and important, I think, organizations researching this stuff. They write papers, and they'll put papers on their website, but they don't seek, attention from the press or otherwise, because really they're working with organizations across the world, like the French UFO organization. They work with aviation organizations and pilots. So they're very careful about their research and how they frame it to make sure that they come across as scientific and professional. And Dr. Haynes, who works with Ted Rowe, worked for NASA for many years. That's where his career was as a scientist. So they're a great organization, and Ted will be talking more about their research.
Great. Excellent, Alejandro. So we will be talking to you next week.
All right. Talk to you next week, buddy.
Thanks very much. All right, everyone. Hang in there. We'll be right back after this quick music break with Dr. Kevin Randle. Hello, Kevin.
Hello.
How are you?
I had to turn my mic back on.
Glad to have you back on the show. I was looking, and it was, let's see, October 28th, 2015. So just over a year. And it seems way too long.
I think so, too.
Yeah. So you have a book that came out this year.
I do, called Roswell in the 21st Century.
Yeah.
What I had done, well, actually, I had thought about for a long time of doing a ultimate Roswell book. Look at all the evidence, look at all the information that I've gathered, look at all the information that's been published and said about the case. And Tom Carey accosted me in Roswell. He said, want to go out to Church's Fried Chicken for lunch? And I said, of course, because I would not turn down Church's Fried Chicken. And he proposed that we do the ultimate Roswell book. And the project kind of grew out of there. I had been thinking about it and actually had talked to a publisher about doing it. And he decided that what they wanted to do was books that had lots of different cases in it, not just a single case. But anyhow, the whole plan with Tom Carey fell apart. And so I decided to continue on myself. But I looked at everything that I could possibly find to determine what is fact, what is fiction, where we stand today in the case. And as I say to practically anybody who will listen, it'll probably annoy everybody because it doesn't leap to the conclusion that what fell at Roswell was extraterrestrial, but it also kicks the stool out from underneath the skeptics who believe it was Project Mogul. So there's a little bit for everybody in there. There's a little bit in there to annoy everybody.
Well, you've been at that particular research project for 30 years?
We started, I think Don Schmidt approached me in 1988. And I went to the Center for UFO Studies, and we all talked about what was going on. And we made our first research trip to New Mexico in February of 1989. I had arranged a meeting with Bill Brazel, which turned out that I did it right. I mean, people would call him and want to meet with him, and he didn't want to do it. And I just sent him a letter and said, if you'd like to talk to us, give me a collect call, and we'll chat. And he said, when we got down and talked to him, he said he really appreciated being contacted by a letter, not phoned for an interview. And he said that he had told his wife, Shirley, that if he liked us, he would help us out. And if he didn't, well, he'd just blow us off. And apparently he liked us because he provided us with a great deal of information. But that whole research trip into New Mexico just blew up. We were supposed to meet with Frank Joyce, and he got sick. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. We were set to meet with an Albuquerque UFO group, and they turned out to be wackos. We went down to Roswell. We talked to Cliff Stone, but he really didn't have any insights into the thing. And I'm thinking, this is really not going anywhere. Then we met Bill Brazel, and I said, oh, maybe there's something to this after all. So, yeah, we've been doing all of this since 1989. I don't know how many trips I've made to New Mexico to talk to witnesses, to look at the sites, to do all of that sort of thing, looking in archives and libraries and everything that we could possibly think of that might provide us with a little bit of insight to what went on in Roswell. So I have a great deal of information about it, and have been doing it for quite a long time.
Yes. Well, you sort of just, I think I would call it, you sort of just dropped a bombshell, and I can't let it go without asking, did you say that has nothing to do with extraterrestrial?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I said it doesn't lead us directly to the extraterrestrial, which was something actually I've said for a long time, that if you eliminate all the explanations, Mogul being the latest one thrown up, you really have nothing left. That doesn't take you directly to the extraterrestrial, but it is suggestive of it. And I think that where we stand today, you look at the evidence, the evidence, which is basically testimony. We have very little in documentation, especially official documentation. We have a lot of newspaper clippings that don't take us anywhere. We've had an awful lot of witnesses who came forward who lied about it, and we can point our fingers at any number of them. When all is said and done, is all we have is the testimony, and now a lot of it collected from family members, not even the person who was involved. So the amount of testimony we have doesn't really take us anywhere. I mean, you've got people who talked about seeing the bodies, and there's a couple that seem to be fairly credible, but you have people who talked about the debris and how it was nothing like they'd ever seen before. So that suggests it, but we don't have the thing that you would want to prove it. The Roswell slides last year suggested we may be getting to the point where we have the smoking gun, and as everybody knows, that blew up. So that we're stuck with that sort of thing. Linda Corley did a book about Jesse Marcel Sr. She lived in Houma, Louisiana, where Jesse Marcel lived, and I don't know why anybody who'd ever left Louisiana would come back to it. But I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Louisiana is a nice place. She had sat down with him and apparently recorded 4 or 5 hours of interviews with him and his wife and about what went on. And you read her book, which is cleverly called, I think, For the Sake of My Country, and it's Linda Corley, and it's about her interviews with Jesse Marcel. And you read that thing, and Jesse Marcel is saying things that are very disturbing, that suggest maybe he tended to embellish things a bit. And so you begin to worry about things like that. And I mean, if you're looking at this objectively and you read what Jesse Marcel said to Linda Corley, and she's basically provided a transcript of those interviews, you find some disturbing things in them. And you look at the interview that he did with Bob Pratt. We have the transcript for that. The Pratt interview from 1978, 1979, 8 pages, and it's somewhat confusing interview. And there's one point where if you put a comma in, you change the whole meaning of the sentence, and that's the point where Jesse Marcel's talking about how he was forced to bail out of an aircraft that was shot down. And Pratt says everybody survived, and he says all but one crashed into a mountain. Well, that sounds like he's saying everybody died except one guy, other than one survivor. One survivor, everybody else crashed in a mountain. But you put a comma in there and it says one, and then you change the meaning of the sentence that everybody survived except for the one guy who crashed into the mountain. So it becomes very confusing and very, very disturbing. But you look at that sort of thing. You look at what Walter Hott said for virtually his entire life when we were discussing this with him, and what he said repeatedly. In one of the cases, it's from a film that was made. They're asking him if he ever saw the object, and he said, well, no. He'd asked Colonel Blanchard if he could, and Blanchard said no. And then we get the affidavit that he signed within a couple of years of his death. And it alters everything that he'd been saying for years and years and years. And that has to be disturbing. You can say, if you want, well, he was protecting the secret as he was required to do by saying that, and then upon his death, he let the secret out. But, I mean, that only goes so far in kind of excusing these sorts of things. So there's a lot of disturbing things that when you sit down and you look at all the evidence and the testimony we have, it just doesn't seem as robust as it once did.
Is it cloudy too? Is there too much in the mix to decipher?
I think the problem is we have to eliminate the liars and the charlatans and the embellishers from the case. And if we can do that, we end up with a core of information that is very interesting. For example, I guess the best way to say it is, they released the Roswell Army Airfield released the press release that says, yeah, we have a flying saucer. And you can interpret that in many ways. And then you have 3 hours later, everybody saying, no, it's just a weather balloon, which is a cockamamie explanation. So, you go off in those directions and it becomes something clearly fell, something clearly extraordinary happened. Clearly there was some sort of cover-up, but that does not lead us to the extraterrestrial. It is suggestive of something unusual. It can be suggested that takes us toward the extraterrestrial, but it doesn't get us there. What we need is physical evidence. We need documentation. We need all of those sorts of things, and we simply don't have it right now.
Yes. How about, let's talk about the Ramey memo. If technology keeps advancing as far as deblurring and, documents, do you think that someday that document will be able to be completely deciphered?
The problem is it's on film, and there's only so much you can do before you get into the grain of the film that becomes confusing. We had thought, and I say we, David Rudiak being one, and a couple of experts in photography and photo analysis and that sort of thing. I mean, experts in the field that work with police departments and all of that sort of thing. Highly skilled, highly intelligent, highly qualified to do this. We thought if we could get a scan of the original negative, we might be able to do that. And just prior to the Roswell slides presentation in Mexico City, they were able to do that with the help of the University of Texas at Arlington. I was supposed to be there. I got sick and couldn't go. But with the help of the University of Texas at Arlington and the people there who were very cooperative, we got the best quality scans possible in various arrays, various ways. With filters and non-filtered and using microscopes and everything that you could think of, trying to do that. And one of the experts says, if the photography had been just like 12 inches closer, we could probably do it. Jeez. And I'm thinking that we may have taken it as far as we can. David's got a analysis of it that he's pretty convinced is correct. I think it's based on a little bit of supposition on his part, but he's done the best analysis of anybody, and he thinks that he can read it pretty well. What we need is to be able to say, this is the way we got here. If you follow these steps, you will get there too. And right now we can't do that. We cannot clarify it to the point where you can say this is what it says to a great deal of certainty. And so I don't think that the technology is ever going to get us to a place where we can do that.
Yeah, when you talk about it goes down to the grain of the film, it seems like that may be where it loses the whole prospect of being able to be read. And I know there probably will be software that will make conclusions, but it could never be
if we could get a consensus, a really high consensus, that would be something. And it may turn out to be nothing that was created by the military. I mean, the document he's holding may not have been created by the military, because there's a possibility that J. Bond Johnson, the photographer, the man that took the pictures, actually brought the teletype message from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram to Ramey's office and handed it to him. There is the possibility that's where the document came from. And Johnson said at one point that's what happened. He'd come in and he wanted Ramey to have something in his hand, so he handed him the teletype message, and then he of course repudiated that when he realized that meant it wasn't as important a document as it would have been if it was something off Ramey's desk that might purport to tell us that it was an alien spacecraft. So, these are the things that I examine in the book at great depth, these sorts of things, looking at the Ramey memo with the latest information that was available, including the analysis of the experts who went to Fort Worth and spent their time down there looking at all of this sort of thing. So you look at all of that stuff at great depth and try to bring it out in kind of a neutral voice, where I'm not suggesting, yes, this is the truth, or B, this is false. It's, here is the evidence as neutrally and unbiased as I can present it. And I know the skeptics will say, well, your extraterrestrial bias shows through here. And there's others say, well, you've just become a complete and total skeptic. And all I've tried to do is present the information as accurately and neutrally as possible.
And I do definitely appreciate that, that you do, that's your approach. Now, in the forum, there's a question you kind of just touched on when you first started on Roswell. And before I ask that question, though, I wanted to ask you, how many firsthand witnesses would you say that you actually spoke with?
Oh, good Lord. And there's a question that's kind of difficult to answer, simply because I think some of the people who came forward with what they were talking about really weren't discussing the events in Roswell. They have confused it with something else. There's a guy named Newley, I think his name was, who claimed that he had seen something in the bomb bay of a B-29. And they talk about how it might have been the escape pod from the crash. And I think it was probably an MK3 atomic bomb mock-up that he saw in there, because if you read his description and what the atomic bombs looked like back in 1947, he's basically described that. And the real key is it's a silver plate B-29, and silver plate was modified to carry the atomic weapons. But there's a great number of people from the people who were at the base at the time, who Corporal Piles, for example, saw something in the sky that he talked about that he'd seen. Well, here's a first-hand witness seeing something traveling across the sky in the right time frame. He may be a first-hand witness. William Woody talks about how they thought they saw this meteor coming down and crashing north of town and went out to look for it. I mean, here's a first-hand witness to something in the sky, but it may not have actually been the craft itself. So, it's kind of hard to say. There's Thomas Gonzalez, who was transferred off the base shortly after this event took place, and he would carve little alien-like creatures rather than tell people what they looked like. He would sort of carve creatures of it, and so here's a first-hand witness who said he saw the bodies. There's probably 45, 50 different first-hand witnesses we talked to. The members of Blanchard's staff, everyone we could talk to, with a single exception, said it was an alien spacecraft. Edwin Easley, for example, he was a provost marshal. He's a very good example, was very cautious in what he said and was directly involved in this, and apparently saw a great deal, but he was very careful in what he said about it. So there's a first-hand witness as well. So there's a large number of them, but most of them just have a little piece. They don't have the entire story, and that kind of trips you up as well.
Yes, if only this was investigated, right after the cover-up or whatever happened when they said it was a weather balloon. If only it was investigated at that time when it was fresh.
Even a couple of years afterwards would have been great. We start 35, 40 years after the fact, and memories do change.
That's true. Yep, absolutely. The question, one of the questions just in the forum is, do you think that extraterrestrial bodies were recovered at Roswell? Why or why not?
There is testimony to suggest that, and from a number of people. Edwin Easley again suggested that. Walter Hotz said so in his later years, but denied knowing anything about them in his earlier years. Frankie Rowe, a very nice lady, talks about what her father saw, and then we get about it's just secondhand testimony. Her father being a firefighter that went out there, and we're trying to figure that out. And we talked to a firefighter who was there, a guy named Smith, I think it was, who said that the fire department didn't make a run out there, but Dan Dwyer, Frankie's father, did in his personal car, because some colonel came by from the base and said they don't need to go out there, that the base was handling it. I always kind of laugh. It's always a colonel. It's never a captain, never a major. It's always a colonel who came out and talked to him. But, I mean, there's more firsthand testimony that kind of leads to the idea that there were bodies. So there's evidence of that, but the evidence that we have today is not as robust as it was or what we thought we had 15, 20 years ago. And that's because we've learned so much more about the case, and we've been able to identify some of the people who claim to have seen these things, and it reduces the numbers. At one point, I talked to like 8 people who claimed to have seen the bodies, and it turns out not one of them was telling the truth.
Oh,
so you get into that sort of thing.
Now, what about the group that was the archaeology college class or something? Is that what you're talking about, or is that something else?
No, that's something else. The archaeologists were over on the plains of San Agustin, and I think that if there was an event on the plains of San Agustin, it did not take place in 1947. I think the evidence, again, is suggestive that a couple of assumptions were made that weren't valid. And by looking through that stuff, and in the book I go through the entire Plains of San Agustin story about that, which devolved from Barney Barnett's tale. And the tale is not as robust as it once was. The archaeologist's story came through Barney Barnett, and it just doesn't seem to work. We can't find the archaeologists. There was a fellow named Gerald Anderson, who claimed to have seen the archaeologist and claimed to be out on the plains of San Agustin with his family. He was like 5 years old.
Oh, yeah.
And he identified the archaeologist, a guy named Buskirk. Turns out Buskirk, who was in fact an archaeologist, was in Arizona at the time and can prove where he was. He wasn't there. So, the Anderson connection blows up. The Anderson story isn't any good. It's clearly fabricated. Anderson claimed to be a Navy SEAL, and the Navy SEALs used to have a website with a wall of shame on it, and Gerald Anderson's name was on it for claiming to be a SEAL when he was not. Oh. I think they've since taken it down because I think lawsuits have been threatened, and you lie about being a Navy SEAL, and they call you on it, and then they threaten to sue you, type thing. I think it's Don Shipley does a thing on the web about people claiming to be Navy SEALs, and he says for every 1,000 people who claim to be a Navy SEAL, one of them is telling the truth. So it's really just horrendous in that respect. So you move away from the plains of San Agustin and the Barney Barnett tale, and you move away from some of the other stories, and we've got some interesting secondhand testimony. The family of Brown, Sergeant Melvin Brown. I've had some communication with them in the last couple of months, as a matter of fact, but it's secondhand testimony. What we don't have, and it's kind of stunning given the era, we don't have letters that mention anything about this that family members would have kept. We have no diaries. We have no journals. We have nothing like that you'd expect if this event had happened. The only diary we have, and kind of proves a point, is Ruth Barnett kept a diary for 1947. It's apparently the only year she did it. Somebody had given her a daily reminder book, and each day she wrote what had happened. And you get into the daily reminder book, and you're looking in July of 1947. There's no indication Barney Barnett was on the plains of San Agustin seeing a crashed flying saucer. In fact, he contradicts Gerald Anderson's story of being there on the 5th of July because the diary says Barney was in Socorro buying glass for their windows for the new house they were building. So you get all of this kind of stuff, and it becomes very, very kind of discouraging. When you've got this story, Barney Barnett seemed to be a great story, and now you find a document from 1947, and there's just no indications in it at all about this event. And I know Stan has said, well, if it happened and they were scared and he didn't tell anybody about it, but you go back and you read the testimony of Barney Barnett's relatives. Supposedly at Thanksgiving in 1947, he told the story to people. But there's nothing in the diary from that time either. Well, Barney told us this amazing story at Thanksgiving dinner today about seeing this alien spacecraft. Nothing in the diary to suggest that at all. Wow.
Now, what about the deathbed confession that the in Florida of the woman who claimed to see the bodies?
Well, actually, these aren't technically deathbed confessions, because that's a legal term, and it usually refers to admitting to a crime of some kind.
All right.
So
you know what I mean, though.
Yes, we have people who are in very poor health, and they know their time isn't long. I think you're talking about Marianne Gardner. But
her caretaker is the one who talked about it?
I'm not sure where we're going with this one. There's so many of these things, and they're from Florida, that it just confuses me. But most of the time, it's secondhand testimony at best. And given the way things have gone, I'm just becoming a real pessimist about deathbed testimonies and secondhand testimonies, because there's just so many ways that testimony can go bad in error.
Totally understand that. Now, on the message board, someone's asking if you know anything about Chuck Littell saying to General Blanchard that...
Chester Littell. That comes from a book that Robert, why is his name gone? And he's a good friend. Oh, my goodness gracious.
I had that happen the other day. Someone was asking me, and I couldn't remember a friend's name. I hate
Well, it's Robert Hastings. Robert Hastings.
Bob Hastings. Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, Robert Hastings. Don't call him Bob. It's Robert.
I'm calling him Bob now. I'll tell you why later.
Oh, okay. He tells that story in his book on nukes, that Chester Littell was being flown from Alaska to Illinois because his wife was about to have a baby, and he was out there working with the Air Force on something. And Blanchard, who was now a general, and it's the 1950s, arranged for him to get a flight back to Illinois so he could be there when his wife gave birth. And on this flight, they talked about this event, and Blanchard admitted to Littell that, there were four bodies recovered. Secondhand testimony again, but given the reputation of Chester Littell, that's much more persuasive than some of those secondhand testimonies. So what strikes me as odd, though, is Don Schmitt and I spent a lot of time with Chester Littell in Albuquerque. Went out to dinner with him lots of times, went to his office, and he and Don would get in these discussions that just were a crashing bore. And I'm going, I got to keep awake. They were just having a great time, and I've just lost it completely. But I'm surprised that he never mentioned a thing like that to us, and even in passing. But that's just the way it was. Maybe he just became more comfortable with Robert because Robert lived in Albuquerque at the time as well. So it's a very interesting story. You have to remember it's secondhand, but it comes from a very credible individual. So he wouldn't be making it up. Mm-hmm. And there's other testimony. Art McQuitty, who had been the editor of the Roswell Morning Dispatch. And this is the thing that just kills me. Back in those days, there were 2 daily newspapers in Roswell, New Mexico, for God's sake. There's like 7 people living in town, and they got 2 daily newspapers. But he was the editor of the Morning Dispatch, and he said that he was at some kind of testimonial dinner that Blanchard attended, and they were seated next to one another, and they got back onto the Roswell case, and Blanchard kind of admitted to him that there were bodies involved. Another secondhand testimony, but you're getting into the idea that Blanchard did kind of spread that story around a little bit. So you wonder why Blanchard would say anything about it if it wasn't true, and B, that why either one of these people would say that, especially Chester Littell, if it wasn't true. So
now it makes me wonder. You're talking. We're talking so many years after. I wonder what things are going to be viewed at. That is, if we never find out the truth in 100 years from now, what's going to be left of Roswell? Of what Roswell will be just like a fantasy story or something. It makes you really wonder, doesn't it? Well,
a myth from the Old West type of thing. And this is the problem that I've had with the case. At one time it seemed so robust, and it seemed there was just so much going on, and we've just seen so much of that collapse. We had the alien autopsy nonsense that didn't help. We had the Air Force reinvestigating. Actually, the Air Force didn't reinvestigate the Roswell case. What they actually did was survey different government agencies to see if they had any documentation about Roswell, which really isn't quite the same thing as reinvestigating the case, and came up with this Project Mogul nonsense. So we've got all of that, and we may be at the point where we may find out what it really was. If it wasn't extraterrestrial, we may find out what caused the reaction in Roswell in 1947 that it got. What sort of thing happened at that time that created this story, and that as we got into it, and I say we as UFO investigators, starting with the original researchers got into it, how we kind of morphed it into a spacecraft type thing. Even though that suggestion was out there, I think Frank Edwards did something in his book, Flying Saucer Serious Business, in 1965. He mentions the Roswell case and a crash. He got nearly every fact wrong, except it was Roswell, and there's a discussion of a UFO crash. But it sort of morphed into this big story, and we were lucky that we had a list of literally 1,500 people who were at Roswell in 1947 that we could go to and see what they might have heard or might have to say about it. But we may find out what really happened if it wasn't alien. We might find out what caused it, and say, well, it was covered by they felt they had to do this for whatever reason. I can't think of what it would be. Here we're moving into nearly 70 years after the event. What possibly could have happened? What possible secret could it be? What possible terrestrial explanation could it have that we couldn't be told today? It's not like anybody who was involved in it is still alive to be punished or anything like that. If there's a legitimate explanation, we should have it by now. And so I say in the book, you look at that, and Sagan says extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I look at the other side where Sherlock Holmes said, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever is left, no matter how improbable, must be the solution. Well, at this point, we've eliminated all the other answers. There is no other answer. Can we prove it was extraterrestrial? Absolutely not. Doesn't mean it wasn't. Just means we can't prove it. But there is nothing else that explains it as far as I know right now, this minute. There may be something coming down the pike that would explain it, and then in the far future they'll look back and say, yeah, these guys thought it was a flying saucer from outer space and it turned out to be blah, blah, blah. Or they may look back and say, yeah, it was a first contact and you guys blew it.
Oh, by the way, I have to correct you on something. That was Marcello Truzzo that actually came up with that saying, and Carl Sagan stole it.
Yes, you're right. Yes. Marcello Truzzi that said that. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Let's see. There was a question. Oh, yes. How about the June Crane story?
Oh, she wasn't there in 1947.
Oh.
She had her work history. Her work history is really sporadic in the parachute, what she did at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's really, really sporadic. But in July of 1947, she wasn't there. I had thought at one time, given her work history, that she might have been talking about the Kingman, Arizona crash. And but I think now that story is a hoax. So she was a nice lady. I talked to her. I have letters from her. She sent me pictures of her garden, among other things, and documentation. I have the original documents. Other people have them up on their websites. They have copies of the documents. I actually have the original she sent me. But unfortunately, I just don't think her story doesn't relate to Roswell. That's the kindest thing I can say. It doesn't relate to Roswell. Might relate to something else. She might have misunderstood what was going on, but she was a very nice lady, and tried to be as helpful as she possibly could. But I just don't think it relates to Roswell.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you about Chase Brandon.
Why?
Because I've never asked you before.
Another cockamamie story. Yeah, I'm wandering around the CIA and I look in this vault and there's a box named marked Roswell. Why in the hell would it be marked Roswell, for God's sake?
It would be numbered only, if anything.
Well, or it might say Corona, or it might say flying saucer crash. But the Roswell's kind of a misnomer for this thing that came out of, I guess, Bill Moore's typewriter, calling it the Roswell incident, because the debris field that Brazel talked about was up closer to Corona, New Mexico, and there apparently is a site or two closer to Roswell where the bodies were located, but it's still quite a ways away. So
60 miles, right?
Something like that. The roads back, even the roads when we were driving back in the early 1990s, were really, some of them were really crappy. You go down this road from Corona toward the turnoff to get to the Brazel Ranch, and you come to this big sign. It says, "Road becomes impassable in inclement weather." This is the 1990s, for God's sakes. You can't keep your roads. But anyway. So there's all that sort of thing going on, but this Brandon Chase guy, I don't know what the hell his problem was. That story just struck me as cockamamie when I heard it.
Yeah, I had heard a couple of people that really thought it was something, but I just don't know. I've never really looked into it that much, but I thought the first thing that hit me was, why would anything be marked, Roswell? I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me. But I don't know.
That's exactly what I thought. Why would it be marked Roswell? And then the other thing is, he may have had access to the top secrets, but top secrets are guarded a little bit differently than the other classification levels. You just can't wander into a vault and start looking around. Mm-hmm. You have to have a reason for going in there.
It's the need to know thing. Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be pawing through this stuff. And that's the thing that always stuns me about these sorts of things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't really make that much sense. A question that came up on the message board a while back. You mentioned Clifford Stone earlier in your books. He is now a controversial figure in ufology. What is your current view on him and his stories?
Cliff is a very nice guy. Mm-hmm. I've visited him at his house. First time I ever met him, he didn't want to meet us at his house. He met us at the Burger King, North Main Street in Roswell. I say that for the Burger King to get some publicity. I don't know why. But so he shows up in uniform, in his sergeant's uniform.
He was retired?
No, he wasn't retired yet, but it was a Saturday afternoon. He should have been in civilian clothes. I don't know why he showed up in his uniform. And he takes us to his house. I'm thinking, well, this is really stupid because his name is in the phone book. So, I mean, anybody wants to find him, look him up in the phone book. So he takes us to his house, and we go inside, and we're sitting there. He says, I gotta go. I'll be right back. I got to get something out of the car. And he goes outside the car, and he comes back in, and he's carrying this folder. This is top secret on it. And he goes in his bedroom. And I'm thinking, if that's really top secret material, you're going to jail there, Cliff. Because, A, you're not protecting it properly. I'm not sure if you've got a vault in your bedroom, but I'm betting you don't. And I'm not talking about a safe. I'm talking about a vault. Top secret material requires a vault. When I was an intelligence officer, although cleared for top secret, we didn't have any top secret materials that I had to store. I had a safe that weighed like a ton, but it's not a vault. Across the airfield from me was the refueling wing, and they had access to top secret material, and they had a vault. So, I mean, the first time I see him, he's trying to pull this stunt and impress us because he's carrying around top secret material, which is – I have a science fiction novel. It's got secret stamped on a lot of pages, and it's because when I was in the Air Force Reserve, one day I was bored in the office and had that novel with me, so I stamped a bunch of pages top secret just for fun. I think it's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. Anyhow, Cliff spins a lot of stories. He talked about – and then the one that really got me, and I think Don Eckers both, he published a story in UFO magazine about him sneaking through the wire when he served in Vietnam to go out hunting the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese. And I'm thinking, yeah, if I saw anybody in the wire, I'm opening fire. And where I was stationed at Cu Chi, they had to have an officer on the bunker line, on our section of the bunker line, and so it rotated among the officers. So I had an opportunity to be on the bunker line a couple of times, so I know how that thing was. And you see anything in the wire, you open fire. And I remember one night, I didn't do it, but one of the other guys did. They opened up on this thing that they saw on the wire because they'd never seen it before. And the next day they found out they'd just shot up a South Vietnamese grave that had been erected some 500 meters away from the base camp. It was something new, and they thought that it was something they needed to engage. So, I mean, he tells those stories, and that just ruins his credibility. Remember when the alien autopsy came out, he said, yeah, he'd seen the film.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Oh, yeah, that was a big deal. He said, yeah, I saw that film. I didn't see it. I saw it when I was doing this and this and the other thing. I did a thing on my blog, which is a good place to plug, kevinrandle.blogspot.com, where I looked at a number of these people who made claims, and Cliff Stone, and I looked at the stories he had told to how they'd evolved over the years. So I don't find Cliff credible in what he says, but he's a nice guy, and I enjoy talking to him.
Yeah, he seems like one of those people that are just plain nice.
Yeah, he's a nice fella. I'm not sure how he could spend 22 years in the Army and never get above tech sergeant, but that's just me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, he moved into these senior NCO grades, but he never made master sergeant. He never made command sergeant major or sergeant major or command sergeant major. So, of course, people can point at me and say, well, you spent 22 years in the Army or the military, and all you got was to lieutenant colonel. Why didn't you get fired? I can explain that. I spent a lot of time as a warrant officer, people. But, I mean, you look at those sort of – he's a nice enough fellow, but he just tends to embellish his stories and put himself in positions where he couldn't possibly have been.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, and this might be hard to answer for you, but what is your gut feeling about what happened at Roswell, going back to that?
I'll tell you what I'd like. I would like it to be alien. I'd like it to be extraterrestrial. I fear it's going to turn out not to be. The evidence, like I said, the evidence is not nearly as robust as it once was. I think I've talked about this on my radio show, too, a little bit. About
just
that.
To let the listener know about your radio show, too.
Yes. I have a radio show on the X Zone Broadcast Network called A Different Perspective, cleverly titled it after my blog. It airs on Saturday nights the first time at 9 p.m. Eastern time. It's on the network, and there's a satellite feed. Usually I end up with a link, and so it's up on YouTube, and I should have the link for today's show, which was interesting. I talked to a guy who actually had been an officer in Blue Book at the end of Blue Book, and so that was kind of interesting.
Wow.
And the links usually show up like Thursday or Friday, so you can listen to it through YouTube. Just a different perspective by Kevin Randle, and for your listeners, if you go to the X Zone, it's xzbn.net. If you go to their website, there's voting for your favorite radio host. So vote for me. Rob McConnell is, he's leading. He's got like 5,000 votes, and the rest of us have like 200. So vote for me if you get a chance. But and we went off on a tangent there.
I know, and I interrupted you. Sorry.
Yes, and I'm not sure where we were going at the time.
There was someone on your radio show you had mentioned.
Well, we had talked about we talked about the Roswell case. I had Don Schmidt on talking about the slides and other things that he has done as well. But we kind of talk about where the case stands today and where we all kind of fall in the perspective. I believe Tom Carey believes absolutely it was extraterrestrial. I think Stan Friedman believes absolutely it was extraterrestrial. Don, I think, is not absolute. He pretty sure, like 90% sure, but there's always the possibility, and I think I fall a little bit further down the continuum, down towards 75% or something like that. Yeah, I think it's extraterrestrial. We just don't have the evidence to prove it.
Now, another question on the forum is, do you think that we are being visited by extraterrestrials, and what makes you come to your conclusion?
Yes, I do. And the reason I do is things like level land, the sightings where we had the UFO interacting with the environment, stalling the car engines. You had witnesses at 13 separate locations, as near as I can tell, independently reporting the same thing of their car engines being stalled. That's a very, very robust case. I look at the Socorro case, and I vacillate on that one simply because you can say, well, it's single witness. It's just Lonnie Zamora, but he's very credible. And but there's hints that maybe others saw things too. But we get into the secondhand testimony. Richard Holder was a range officer at White Sands at the time, and he kind of investigated. He was one of the first guys on the scene, Captain Holder. And he wrote a report, and he said that the 3 people had called the police about the same time Lonnie Zamora was seeing the object in the sky, and they reported seeing the thing too. But the police didn't bother writing anything down. You don't have the names. They didn't write it down in their logs. But apparently the dispatcher told Holder this within hours of the event happening. So there's some interesting testimony that suggests others saw it in the sky, but we don't know who the hell they were. We don't know anything about what they saw. They just called the police, and the police didn't bother to write anything down, which is kind of annoying. But there's a very, very good, solid case. There's some cases like that. As I said, level land is very good because of everything that went on there and around that area at the time. I think within 12 hours, the object was seen at White Sands, and there's some very interesting testimony out of White Sands. I talked to one of the guys, one of the MPs who was there at the time, and gave me some insight into what was going on. So there's some solid cases like that. So I think visitation is taking place. I don't think it's nearly as frequent as it's been suggested in the UFO community, but I think it's taken place.
Now, speaking of White Sands, there's a video that shows this object crashing that's like glowing bright. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, it used to be on my website till YouTube changed all their rules, and they won't let you play it anymore.
No, that seems incredible
it's a missile
to me.
Yeah, but it's a missile that went astray.
But how could it be glowing like that?
You're seeing the back end of it. You're seeing the fire, the flame of it. It's a missile that went astray. I think it's well documented. And in fact, I talked to the people at White Sands about that when the video first hit a number of years ago. And this is really kind of neat. And I talked to them, and they had pretty much the documentation showing that it was a missile that misfired in some fashion.
That's so disappointing.
I know. I hear you.
So that's it for the free part of the show. Thanks so much for listening. Remember, if you want to support us for only $2 or more per month, all you have to do is go to podcastufo.com. A one-time setup. You use PayPal, and it's real easy to put the link in your media player or listen on the website, whatever, when you log into the full shows and archives. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with Tony Angiola and Ben Moss. I haven't actually heard from Tony, but Ben will definitely be on. So I'll be back next week, same time. And thanks again. And remember, go to the forum. It's an easy sign up there. Thanks again for listening. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.